Okay, we're live. Hi, everybody. I'm Dr.
Yay.
Patti Ashley. Welcome to Shameless Facebook Friday Lives and the special series on grief, grace, and the holidays. I'm really looking forward to our conversation today with a sweet friend of mine that I met years ago. Hello out there to Elaine Collins for introducing us many moons ago in our networking group, one of our dear friends. And I've gotten to know my guest today through the years, and I know that she's experienced grief in her life, and she's created a program called Carpe Diem, which I love because it means seize the day. And I think that's our lesson, right? Is to always learn to seize the day. So I want to introduce my guest. She's a leadership coach. She's a blogger. She's created her Carpe Diem program. She does all kinds of great things to help people with grief and connecting. So welcome, Yvette Francino. Am I saying that right? Francino?
Yes.
I've never really said your last name before. Hi. Thanks for joining me today.
Hey,
And
Patty. I'm very honored to be here.
yeah. So tell us a little bit. I know I mentioned briefly about you, but tell us a little bit about you and how grief, is a part of your life's work. And I know it's a big open-ended question, but
Yeah, I think really this Carpe Diem movement that I've been a part of really started because of my friend Craig Dunham, who had ALS, and he died in 2010. So since 2010, I've been a strong advocate for ALS awareness, and his name, Craig Dunham's, the initials CD are like Carpe Diem. And
oh,
so I created this emblem that is C and a D and sort of shaped like a heart. And that was the emblem for Super Carpe Diem Woman. So I also created this. That's my Facebook picture still is my Super Carpe Diem. I'm all super your hero like, but I have the CD emblem, and then you can have a CD was sort of, and it looks like a cool little superhero emblem. So we created these CD superhero emblems for the walk to defeat ALS. That in 2014, one of my goals was to be the top fundraiser
mhm.
for the walk to defeat ALS. And so I gathered up all my friends and network, and we all dressed as superheroes for that walk. And so that's really kind of how it began. But it was really an effort to, I think in some ways it's a way to process your grief is to try to do something that will feel like the person didn't die in vain, that their message still is going on, that you're going to try to preserve their legacy, that you're going to pass on all the wonderful things you learned from them. And in the case of Craig, I learned also just the grace, that you talk about so much, how he, through his journey with ALS, really, I was able to witness such grace that it helped me a lot with being okay, I think, with dying and helping to recognize, again, what a difference it makes, how different, it made me think a lot more about grief, and I've learned more from your book and your teachings and things like that. And so that's how Carpe Diem Day got its start. And well, I didn't say Carpe Diem Day. That's how the Carpe Diem movement happened. But I really do a whole bunch of things with this Carpe Diem mantra. And last year, for my 60th birthday, I did this whole 60 weeks till 60 project, and I was very intentional about having these one-on-one kinds of celebrations with a lot of different people. And my kids and friends surprised me on my birthday. You can purchase a national day, and so they gave me National Carpe Diem Day for my birthday, and that's and wrote this wonderful thing about how I was inspired by Craig and how I, do these radical, intentional celebrations and things like that in honor of, living life fully. So I felt like, okay, I have to live up to this tribute. And so, that's been my mission, is to spread that word about living fully and trying to find joy in the ordinary and really just spend this life recognizing every moment is precious and how can we live fully during this time. So
yeah, no, I love that. And studies of resiliency have shown that people who give back, find a purpose for things that have happened to them, actually are the most resilient. So it's why I do what I do, and it sounds like what Carpe Diem is about for you. It's a way to give back from having been through grief. And ALS, I know, is a terrible disease, and it drags out over time, as the person is losing.
Yeah, it is. It's a tragic disease. However, I know, grief comes in all different forms, and I know you've experienced a lot of grief in your life, and I've had 3 major deaths during my lifetime, and each of them was different, and the grief feeling was different. The first one was my brother. When I was 35, I was 37 and he was 35, and he died in a car accident. So that was by far just the deepest grief, because it was so unexpected and he was so full of life, and it just was surreal. So that's, this like, I cannot believe this happened to him kind of feeling. And the second was my dad, who died from cancer, colon cancer. He actually was, but he'd been having a lot of near-death kind of issues with his health, and he was 75. And so that one was, and I do think for a lot of people, as close as you are to them, if they've had a full life, if you've had some time to process that they are dying, and you've had some, and definitely in the last couple of years of my dad's life, once he had the cancer diagnosis, I mean, we did get closer and we did spend more time together, and there was this recognition that this might be the last time we get these kinds of visits and things like that. And then the third one was Craig. And with that one, we did have the recognition because he had ALS. That was different because, as you said, it's a very tragic disease in that you lose all the function to move and to speak. So that deterioration was extremely difficult to witness. But what was so good about me being able to witness and having the experience of having that last year really of being spending quite a lot of time with Craig is I learned so much again from witnessing this grace that he exhibited, that he still found ways to find humor and play and an attitude that was so admirable. So often when I think about him, and even during that year, I mean, I'd cry for sadness of knowing that he was dying and that he was going through so much, but also was just out of inspiration and awe at how he could exhibit such this attitude. And so, again, each experience is different. And then since then, too, I've had other friends that I've lost, none that were as close as Craig, but it is just always a sadness and a shock. But I think you do start to build some resilience and some recognition again of that this is part of life. And you recognize that a lot has to do with how the person who died is, how they feel about death and how they're handling it, especially if it's a terminal illness. And I know with both of your father and Lauren's, they both died suddenly. And again, when it's sudden and you really haven't had time to process, that again is just such a shock on the system of, it seems unreal. And I think that's extremely hard. So,
well, when you're talking about Craig, it made me think about Tuesdays with Maury.
yeah.
And lessons. I think the subtitle is something like "Lessons Learned from Dying" or something.
Yeah.
And
I
I
just heard Mitch Albom speak a couple of days ago. He was speaking live at an event, and he had some quotes from Tuesday. But what my experience with Craig, he lived in Evergreen, which was about an hour drive from where I live. So I would go. It was Sundays that I would go visit him, and so I always thought it was kind of like I was Sundays with Craig. It's a lot like the Tuesdays with Maury.
Yeah,
and,
yeah.
And it
And
was
your blog, you talk about some of those experiences in your blog.
Yeah, I do. I really, in preparation for coming to talk to you, I was, reminded myself, I kind of Googled different posts that I had. I wrote a lot about my experience with Craig and during those visits. And, again, it was very inspiring. So some of the things were, when he lost his ability to talk quite early. ALS affects people differently, and of when they lose what kinds of functions. But he was very frustrated that he couldn't talk. But I did recognize that you can talk a lot with your eyes. I mean, it is amazing how, again, just you can kind of read people's moods by their eyes. And he still had expression in his face, and he was able to mouth words. So we found ways to communicate. But yeah, I kind of made notes of some of the times. Here's one post I'll talk about, this final conversation that we had. And again, he's not talking, but he got to a point where he couldn't swallow anymore. And early in his diagnosis, he had, they were talking about whether you get a feeding tube once you can't swallow. So, but he decided not to get the feeding tube. And so we knew that that death was imminent at this point, this last conversation that I had with him. So I went up to visit him like I always did. And I asked him, you're not getting the feeding tube, is it because you want to die? And he shook his head, emphatic shake of the head. Eyes determined to tell me he was not depressed or suicidal. He did not want to die. And then I was like, then why not the feeding tube? And then he was a sympathetic shake of his head, eyes telling me he was sorry, but he didn't want the feeding tube. And then I said, because you're ready to die. And he nodding, eyes telling me I got it right this time. He had lived a full life. He had not let this disease stop him from living as fully as he could, but now it was time. And then me saying, but I'll miss you. And then sympathetic nod, eyes telling me he knows, but telling me that I must let him go. And I remember reading that from your book too, Love is Letting Go. And, I can't, it's hard. Like I said, I can, those memories, they do make me cry all the time, but I do think he had so much strength. He never was crying through these times. He was looking forward to the next, being with God. He had a very strong faith, and he was not afraid to die. And he was worried about me and his friends and certainly his children, but he was ready to go, and that just again gave me a lot of strength myself. And I wrote, this other thing that said, in that final conversation with him, I knew that everything was going to be okay. This was a prompt we had to. I was in this writers group, and there was a prompt about writing about everything is going to be okay. So I started saying, there's all kinds of things we worry about all the time, and one of the things we always say, like even with COVID, this will pass and it will be okay. Or when we have an illness, we say this will pass and it'll be okay. But in the case of when Craig was sick, it's like, no, you can't say everything's going to be okay because he's going to die, and you just keep getting worse and worse. And I would think, how can people with no hope, how can they keep going? And but I had that conversation, and I knew it was going to, even with imminent death, he was not going to survive, but everything was going to be okay. That faith of his was so strong. He didn't have a bit of doubt or fear in his face. He was full of peace and reassured me with his eyes that everything was going to be okay, better than okay. He knew he'd be in eternity with God. I have always wished for a faith as strong as Craig's. I know I'm nowhere close, but witnessing his faith helped strengthen mine. Just like I knew there was a God the moment I held my baby, I felt sure at that moment, during that last conversation with Craig, that he would be with that God after his death. And I realized that no matter what happens, even when we don't survive, everything is going to be okay. In fact, for anything like Craig, it's going to be downright glorious. And so, again, that being with him and experiencing that with him, saying goodbye to him, really helped me recognize that after, the death will be okay. And
how old was he when he died?
50.
50. So yeah.
And so it's, but it is hard for those of us left behind, because we miss the people we the people we lose. And there were so many things that struck me from your book, Patti, as well. I wanted to, I know that you keep Lawrence alive with so much of what you do, and even quotes from your book, because his work was about grief as well, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you're okay with this, I wanted to read something that struck me, that in the eulogy, you said, he left a legacy of love that will live on forever in my heart and in all of yours. And then these were his words, I believe. You were an expression of love before you were born. You will return to love when you pass. Between your first breath and your last breath, your true mission is to remember the love that you are and to extend this love all around you. And I love that, because it just really does. Love is the emotion that I've tried to figure out, that I 1 year I was doing a whole, the love project is what I called it. And I blogged every week about different kinds of love and what does love mean. And it's such a elusive emotion, and there's so many different facets to it, but it really is tied. I remember hearing once something about, if you are grieving, remember that means that you loved, that your grief is really the loss or the feeling like you don't have that love anymore. And so savor that love, keep that love within you. And I kind of feel like this quote from Lawrence is saying that, be the love, keep this love, and we keep the love from these people that we learn from alive by spreading that word. And that's what you do all the time. So
yeah, I think you're right. Love, that word is misunderstood so much. And It really is infinite, and it is, I believe, what goes on after, reminds me of a song, Crowded House, it's called She Goes On, and she goes on in the wind and the trees and and I do believe that. I don't understand it. It's a mystery, what happens after we die, but I do think that there is something that connects us all, and love is probably, in my version, the best way to describe it.
Yeah, but I sort of feel like that's what the grace is that you're talking about. That final stage of grief is that, the love that is around us still, that is encompasses that feeling that we had for the person that has moved on to that
Yeah, and
life, whatever that is.
what Lawrence said to me when he was developing his curriculum, we were just starting to date, and he was very excited about, teaching this course From Fear to Love to Grace. And he said, I just discovered that it's just more than love. It's more than love. It's grace. And it is because, I think a broken heart cracks us open to something even more than our human minds can comprehend. And yeah, and I do think that is the grace. And it's also, I love the little messages that I feel like I get from him, like when the ladybugs showed up.
Mm-hmm.
And we have a special thing with ladybugs. Have you
Right.
had experiences like that after your losses? Like, some people have feathers and pennies and, little,
Yeah.
just kind of get a song that comes on the radio.
Well, definitely the songs. I it is interesting that I after my brother died, I don't remember. I think you might have talked a little bit about this in your book too. I would have a lot of dreams that seemed
Mhm.
so real that it felt like this is more than a dream.
Yeah.
This is like my ability. This communication with, and so again, you really never know, is this definitely, is this communication from the afterlife or not? But I, with my brother, um, that I would have dreams almost every night. And most of the time, and in the dreams, he was alive and we were talking or, everything. And then when I woke up, it would be like that hard reality of he's dead. That was just a dream. And so it's kind of like the dreams were great, but then the waking up was hard. And but I do remember one, and this is the one that did feel the most like this felt like not more than a dream. It was uh, a very strong message, kind of like this "everything will be okay" thing. This was my brother saying, "It is okay, that I am okay.
Yeah.
Don't be sad." And it it was the first time that I woke up, and I was kind of like, yeah, I feel like that was a real message from him, and I feel like I'm not scared, because I do think that um, I grew up Catholic too. I know you have that in your book about growing up Catholic, and uh, the messages of heaven and hell and what's happening. And I mean, when somebody that you love dies, and my brother Chris was, he was a good guy, but I'm sure he did things that weren't going to send him straight to heaven. Although we did have a St. Christopher's medal on, and there is a thing that says that you go straight to heaven, I think, if you have that. But I mean, you do have all these, like, what really is the afterlife, and what if I didn't follow all the rules, or and it was like, I cannot bear to think that I'll die and it will be nothing, or that I wouldn't be able to see him again someday. And so you go through all these questions in your head about the religion, and am I just believing what I want to believe so that I'm not scared of dying, or and it's so difficult to kind of come to terms with not, the mystery of the afterlife. And I don't remember where I was going with that, but I think, again, that those fears, they really would bring up the fears of death. And that was why I said, I think I was, again, this message that when I had that dream or communication from Chris, it felt like he was saying, stop being so scared that, it will be okay. And
yeah, and I think that's why a lot of people are afraid of death, is because they've, learned these things. You're going to go to hell. I remember when I was growing up, I used to think, well, that's not fair. If somebody goes to confession and they confess that they've murdered somebody, they're going to go to heaven. But if I do I have to work really hard not to do those things. It didn't make sense to me. It's like, oh, you just forgive me, Father, and then you're good. So you could really do anything.
I know. It is. In a lot of religion is like that. Like, does this really make sense? And and I know, and I really think it doesn't make sense that what we believe will determine whether we go to heaven or hell. I mean, I don't feel like that was the teachings of Jesus Christ, and so it is confusing. And you certainly want to do whatever I know. I was always a rule follower. I was a big rule follower. So like when I was a kid, I would be, oh, okay, this is what I'm supposed to do to get to heaven. Sure, I'll learn all these prayers and I'll go to confession every week just to make sure if I die this week, my soul will be clean. And but it is, and I do remember the first, speaking of religion and death, the first real grief I experienced, and I've read that this is true with a lot of kids, the first grief they experience is a pet. And so when I was 10, so just a year younger than you were when you lost your father, and again, that's so difficult for a child to have to deal with that. So, to have grief so young. But when my cat died, that was sort of the recognition, like, oh my gosh, everybody dies and this is terrible. And you're so sad. I mean, I cried so much and was in a big grief when my cat died at age 10, and would go and write letters. I mean, we buried her sort of in the yard, and I would put letters in under where the grave was. And so where this ties to religion is, then I went to my CCD class, was the catechism class that I was going to. And I asked the teacher, do cats go to heaven? And she told me they don't, that animals don't go to heaven. Oh, no. So then my mom comes to pick me up and I'm crying and she's like, what's wrong? What's wrong? And I'm like, the teacher said that the cats don't go to heaven. And so anyway, she was like, okay, wait right here. And I could hear her just chewing out the teacher, like, how could you say something like that to her, And,
oh
yes. And so
give it up for you that they do go to heaven.
I don't, I don't know if there's anything in the Bible that talks about whether or not animals go to heaven, but apparently there, it would have been better for the teacher, I guess, to say, I don't know, than to say no. But anyway, so that little incident, again, is just a childhood thing of how these things develop in your head. But that was when I started having this recognition of everybody is going to die someday. And then I remember even thinking, but it will be a long time. Just like usually people will reassure you, you don't have to worry about this till you're, till it's very, very many years. And you did have that big grief when you were just a child. And I know how you said that people kind of were wanting you to get past it and not really process that grief. And now I've done enough of your class to recognize how harmful that can be without kind of going through it, without really processing it and experiencing it. And so again, kudos to you for helping people. I know, I think, I don't know if a lot has been learned about the psychology of grief over the period from when you were 10 till now, or that, you've done enough exploration on your own to recognize these
I
things.
mean, we have Elizabeth Kubler-Ross to thank for that, and that was just what she started. Her books came out in what, the 80s, I think.
Yeah.
And then David Kessler has kind of taken her legacy and added the sixth stage of grief, which he calls finding meaning, and I call grace.
Yeah, I like that.
So yeah, we didn't know, and lifespans were a lot shorter too, at the beginning of the last century, and we're living longer now, and yeah, and people didn't know, and religion was such a thing that people would hold on to, and it can be so destructive because of that, because like, the cat doesn't, well, how do we even know what heaven and hell is as a kid anyway, other than, the fear? That's what was put into me was, oh my God, you better be good or else you're going to burn.
Yeah.
When I burned my hand, my grandmother would say, see, that's what it's going to feel like all over.
Oh gosh.
Gosh,
That's
yeah.
That's bad. I didn't have, anybody really threatening about hell, was thank God, because that, that would be very scary.
Across the street from the church and the school, 12 years of Catholic school. And yeah, and then I kind of, when I discovered later, about all the sexual abuse that had gone on with people that I knew, that I was very close to, and the hypocrisy, I no longer participated in the church, but there's the underlying spirituality of all religions that to me is what is the same, but the humanness of putting all of that fear and power and control, and changing the story for whatever reason the, religion chose to do that. I mean, it's a whole other conversation, but the idea that kids don't understand permanence of death until about 7 or 8, because of the way they think, and then heaven or hell becomes this huge construct that they make up and can be very scary.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and then to be told just people die and they go to heaven or hell, and then your life goes on, and that's all there is. I mean, yeah, that's why I do what I do, because I feel like, wow, there's so much more. I think grief is our biggest teacher. I mean, it teaches us about life, like you were saying. You said that earlier, that you learn so much about Carpe Diem, the importance of seizing the day and living life fully. And the more we love, the more we grieve, but we don't like to feel pain. We don't. We humans, or at least in our American culture here, we try and gloss over things, and they call it lawnmower parents, and trying to smooth things over.
Right.
And really the thing is, how do we, as Glennon Doyle says, how do we know that we can do hard things, right? And that the life is full of hard things, and we're in it right now in this pandemic, and there's so much collective grief, and that so much of what's familiar in our life has ended, as well as literally people dying, and the devastation of this disease. So I think we have to have these conversations, which is, again, why I do this, talk about legacy and giving back, and helping people, have a safe space to do that. And so I really appreciate your stories, because I think we learn a lot from people's stories, and I learned a lot just listening to you tell us, these pieces of how your heart opened in your loss. And Carpe Diem Day, what are we gonna do? Are we gonna is this gonna be like a thing that Hallmark cards gonna
Well, I have to say, that was my goal, was to get this on the map. I mean, it's in the National Archives, but so then I've really gone all out on trying to find all the places that make the calendars or have the websites with the national days. And wow, there are a lot of national days. There are so many, from everything, to National Margarita Day is actually one of the more well-known ones. But I think today, in fact, my friend, because I'm into this stuff, I have friends that say happy whatever it is. One of the days is today is Happy National Absurdity Day. So, I mean,
I like that one.
Kind of absurd that we have so many days for every single day. And so I have come to the recognition that it will be pretty hard to be, they have these National Day calendars. So every day it will tell you today is National Make Your Bed Day or whatever it is. But they pick one of the so many that there are. And I don't think they're ever going to pick National Carpe Diem Day because, for one thing, that's kind of hard to have a picture for that. I mean, usually they have one that they can put a picture, like Make Your Bed Day. They can put a picture of a made bed, or Margarita Day, have a picture of a margarita. But what's that?
You've got your logo.
Yeah, there's the logo. But I did on the website. There's a whole bunch of ideas of how you can celebrate the day. So my idea about it, because there are people that were like, well, it's supposed to be seized every day. So do we really want a National Carpe Diem Day? Because that means people just wait until that day. But I mean, it's just like Mother's Day or any of our days. It doesn't mean we don't honor and celebrate our mother every day. I mean, it's just a day to remember to seize the day throughout the year. And I was talking about trying to create a National Carpe Diem Day before I was gifted with it. I wanted to make it on May 30th, which was personal for me because that's the day I lost my brothers, and it's Memorial Day as well. It's the actual Memorial Day, even though it's observed on the Monday, I think the last Monday in May or something. But the real Memorial Day was May 30th, and I do think that Carpe Diem Day, part of it, I want to be about kind of like Memorial Day, or it doesn't have to be about a veteran or somebody who died in the war. It could be, who have you lost that we can pay homage to and keep their legacy alive on this day. Let's have those happy memories of our ones who have passed. So kind of like Day of the Dead, I think, is like that. And honor some traditions that they used to love, and that's what I'm sort of suggesting for Carpe Diem Day, or just again.
So what day is it?
Well, they made it on my birthday, February 26th. Okay. So yes, I will be sending my friends ideas of celebrating Carpe Diem Day, and originally, like I said before, I knew they were going to give it to me, and I wanted to have it on May 30th. And I was even talking about that, but my kids had already put all the paperwork in and done everything, so it was going to be a birthday surprise. And they were like, "Oh, are you disappointed that it's on your birthday instead of on May 30th?" And they wrote such a touching tribute that I was like, "No, I mean, this now can be sort of my legacy." That's super. Super exciting for me to feel like, and again, I doubt that it'll become famous or be on calendars or anything like that. But at least in my family, they'll know that this was sort of my legacy, that it was important for me to live fully and to pass that message on to others, and to know, that I want them to always remember that. There's always this saying about don't cry because the person's gone, smile because they lived. I think that was Dr. Seuss that said something like that originally. And, I've heard that at different memorial services, that you you're sad for yourself because you're going to miss that person, but it's similar to what we were saying before about grief is really a form of love, and that you want to remember the love. And so, so yeah, I was, definitely it'll probably be the most meaningful birthday present that I ever received. I'm very excited about.
Yeah.
And honored to be, the recipient of Carpe Diem Day. And
yeah.
and so, yeah.
It's so fitting for you because you have so much enthusiasm for the things you do and your creative ideas, and to have a day like that on your birthday, that yeah, it will be your legacy even when you're not around. All the other people who were involved will continue to remember you and to remember all that you've done to help people, really seize the day. And back to Tuesdays with Maury, the quote that I always quote from there is how he said, "Life pushes and pulls, and it's the tension. It's learning how to live in the tension of the opposites." And I talk about that all the time because there's such a paradox of both and in what you were saying. It's like there's the grace and the love that always goes on, and then there's the human grief that feels painful. And I think it's really hard for us to hold both and. I always say, my clients always know, "No, I know it's both and, it's both and, it's both and." Because we try and split. We think, well, if I'm in grief, then it's going to always be this bad, it's horrible, and I got to get out,
Mm-hmm.
which actually makes the grief worse.
Mm-hmm.
And if I'm feeling good, I want to stay there, and I don't ever want to feel bad, instead of recognizing that life pushes and pulls and living in the tension of the opposites. Carl Jung even said that, it's
Yeah.
learning how to embrace paradox, really. And I think
Yes.
that's really hard.
Yes. And I've really been studying positive psychology really since Craig's death, and see that, life is all about, it is that paradox. There are good things, there are bad things, there are sad things, there are happy things. But a lot of it, it is those bad and difficult times that help us not take for granted the good and the happy and the joyful. And so this month, I've really been focusing on joy as part of my Carpe Diem. I'm doing a podcast too, and I was very happy to have you on that podcast. And just there's yard work going on out my window. Is that distracting? Is okay? Okay, good. So I started a new season on Carpe Diem Connection podcast about joy, because have you heard of Joyful, the book? Ingrid Vitale Lee is her name. She wrote a book called Joyful, and she has joy spotters on a Facebook group where people post pictures of things that are bringing them joy. And she has a lot of different worksheets, and she has something called the Joy Makeover. So where it talks about joy and time, joy in relationships, joy in money, and she talks with different experts about that. So I'm doing a whole kind of spin-off of that. And I really do think that it is interesting too that, that you do find more joy, I think, if you've experienced grief. I don't want anybody to experience grief before they have to. It is a terrible emotion, and as much as we're talking about how we learned a lot from experiencing it, it just takes a carefree innocence away from you once you've experienced a deep grief, especially I think at a younger age. And so it's so difficult for you to have had to experience that as a child. And but I do think, again, then you are just really much more savoring the joyful moments. And so I just yesterday had a session about finding joy during COVID and the holidays. It's kind of, like what we're talking about now. And that our tendency can be to, if we're depressed, that we just withdraw, and certainly if we're going through deep grief, it's really hard to, feel happy about little trivial everyday things. But since doing all this work with positive psychology, I've recognized and really gotten in a habit of just seeing so many, like a smile from someone or a text message or a card in the mail that's unexpected, or there's just so many things throughout our day to be grateful for and that do bring joy. And that when we are in grief or sadness or depression, it sometimes it almost feels insensitive. Like, how can I be happy about that when this terrible thing happened? But I have learned that that's the time you need to be. You need to tell yourself, or take some time every day to take those pictures and write in the journal and notice those things, even though, again, I know it doesn't take away from that, and it's not to distract you from processing the sadness, because you still have that too. But I think it's easy to just kind of get so inundated with that it overtakes your mind, and you just want to hide under the covers, and to try to spend some time seeing some of those joyful things, which is a lot easier to do if you get in the habit of doing it when you're not in grief, I think. But anyway.
Well, I think there's the idea of being able to be with the pain and how important it is to tell the story and to have the memories and to share the memories. And there's kind of a tension of the opposites even in that when I think about it, and I think the most important part is in grief is to find those enlightened witnesses, people that can hear our stories.
Yes.
And people are afraid to do that because they're afraid they're creating more grief for the person. But I know from my experiences, that's all I wanted to do was talk about Lawrence. And
yes.
And I would have loved to, as a kiddo, talk about my dad, but it was like, no, we just don't go there, And so there's shame for me in terms of being able to find a way to tell the story. So when you're talking about the joy in the pain, I mean, it's almost like there's some pain and pleasure are actually the same part of the brain. So when we're in our grief and we're telling our stories and we have that enlightened witness, we're actually also honoring that person, as Martine Prechtel says, it's grief is praise, and so there is some joy in even that. But here's the destructive part is when people tell you to get over it and just get up and go do something, or my friend Kim Murdoch, who wrote a book called Feeling Left Behind, Permission to Grieve, because so many people told her, just get out there and start dating again after a year or two. She's like, I don't want to. I'm still in grief. And so that's what we resist persists and often grows stronger. And so I think that's this fine line between being able to hold the tension of the opposites and be in our grief and the memories so we can get to this deeper experience of Carpe Diem and joy and back to life. And it's hard to think of them both existing together, but they can. I mean, the story I always tell is one of my clients her brother overdosed the same day she went out on her first date with this man, and they just actually bought a house together, and they're moving in together, a couple of years after they met. But she was like, I can't be happy. I can't be dating. My brother just died.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I know it is. It's such a weird feeling of, that you do sort of have this feeling that it seems disrespectful to be happy when when you've lost somebody so important that you loved. And I also know, like you said, the people that try to console you, I've been, through enough different deaths to recognize, first of all, that everybody's going to be different in how they respond and what their grief feels like. And then there are so many platitudes of different people saying different things and maybe intending to be, positive, but I've come to recognize this is one of the benefits, I think, of having experienced grief is that you have more compassion and understanding for other people who are experiencing it. And just, it's so much easier to talk to someone who really, you know, they get it. They understand what this grief thing is all about. So when somebody who either isn't experience the same grief because maybe they don't know or love the person who died, or haven't been through a deep grief themselves or whatever, when they give you the advice, it feels a little like you really don't know what you're talking about. But on the other hand, if you are hearing it from someone else, you're more like sharing together, and a lot of times you do just get so much more comfort from people who are experiencing the grief as well, you know, and you share the stories, and a lot of times you do. I know at my brother's funeral we were laughing about a lot of things, you know, and that it's that, you know, you're crying and you're laughing all at the same time, and you just want to stay in that space with other people that are, you know, that loved him too. And I know you recognize that feeling, and you know, you feel kind of, when people then get back to normal, it's just like, I can't get back to normal, you know, you want to keep being in that space of let's keep talking about him, and
as long as it takes. And I think that's the other thing too, is people, you know, take for granted that, you know, and that's the one thing I would say too, when people ask, what do I need after Lawrence died? I said, I need you to check in with me 3 months from now. But everybody forgot. I mean, there was maybe 1 or 2 people that remembered I'd said that, you know, because people just go on with their lives and they don't realize that, you know, grief, you know, especially with it when it's sudden, like you said, and you're in shock for a period of time. And then you move into, oh, this really happened. And then you really need people to show up. But people are thinking, oh, well, it's been 3 months now, so she's probably fine. And I think that's so important for people to realize how much we really need them to reach out, because we don't really know how to ask for what we want or even what we do want. So I really encourage people, if you know anyone who's experiencing loss, to reach out to them even months, years later. I mean, this is the 4th anniversary. Actually, this would have been the sixth year anniversary of our Lawrence and I's first date.
oh, wow.
So he actually died like
2 days before, or a few days before your first date.
Yeah. And then his memorial service was on the date, which would have been the 2nd year anniversary of our first date.
Yeah.
So,
well, and it's right here in holiday season too, right before Thanksgiving. And, you know, that's a difficult time, no matter when the person dies, I think, is the holidays, because you're missing them. And, but especially when.
I'm just thinking of a funny story now that you mentioned that. So we had our first date, and then he went to Vermont to visit his sister. And I was like, are we going to have another date? You know, and he texted me and he goes, do you want me to bring you a turkey from Vermont? And I was like, texting my friend, is he serious?
Was he serious?
Turkey.
Yeah. I loved meeting your.
Bring himself back. He was the turkey, right?
Oh, he was the turkey.
Not bringing me a turkey. But yeah, and so there's these memories and then Thanksgiving. I remember making stuffing the first Thanksgiving after he died to take to my friend's house. And I just remember I was making massive amounts of stuffing, thinking, I don't even know how I'm doing this, you know? So we have all these memories that I think are, so even thank you for letting me share these stories and reminding me of these stories and sharing your stories, because it brings the memories closer when we get to share our stories. So thank you so much for this time.
Yeah.
It was great.
I also want to say, when you were talking about the tips, that was another great thing in your book. I really enjoy that, you know, that you have what to what to do when somebody's in grief and how to help them. And the book was wonderful. I appreciate reading that. I'm glad that right now I'm not having, even though we've got COVID to contend with, I don't know anyone that's sick with it or has died, and I feel so grateful for that. And we all are experiencing the collective grief of this, but the vaccines are on their way, which is wonderful. And so the end is in sight, where we can look forward to things hopefully getting back to pre-COVID feeling of being able to be with each other. But in the meantime, we do have these holidays, and again, this is a difficult time for many, and I'm sure it must be for you as well, very much so, because of
we talked about the gratitude practice in positive psychology, and I was thinking about that this morning about Thanksgiving, and how everybody's all shook up about not being able to necessarily be with family like they're used to being with family, or they're going to do it anyway. And then, our governor here, you're in Florida now, but I don't know if you heard Paula say,
I read it this morning.
Kill your grandmother, for Thanksgiving dinner.
What did it say?
He said, you could kill your grandmother if you go to have Thanksgiving with her. I thought, wow, he doesn't hold back, right? I mean, so there's so much talk about the paradox of the gratitude and grief. There's so much grief around how we're going to do holidays this year, even though, I know as a therapist, holidays stir up all kinds of unconscious memories and uncomfortable feelings and family systems, but that's a whole other piece. But trying to redo holidays different, and Thanksgiving being a day of gratitude. I was thinking this morning, how important our gratitude practice is. And so even if our holidays aren't what our Thanksgiving isn't necessarily what we're used to in terms of the big table with all the people and all the food and everybody touching everybody's spoons, which we can't do anymore. There are still things to be grateful for. And I think that's really, the neuroplasticity on the brain. It creates new neural pathways that say I'm safe and I'm okay and this too shall pass, and I'm grateful for what I do have, whatever that is in our Thanksgiving days, even if they're not what we're familiar with.
So hopefully they'll be more memorable, and in a good way, in a creative way. I know that's how I felt about Easter, but now, it's several months later and we've all kind of zoomed ourselves out, and so we'll see how it all goes. But yeah, I hope people can have that gratitude and joy, and with knowing that there's an end in sight to COVID, and
being what is right now. I think that's the tricky piece. Like, what is there to be grateful for, even in the midst of this crazy world? Because people are very stressed about it. So I want, when we're finished, for you to put how people can find your blog and what you do in the comment section, because I think what happened when this got scheduled, we ended up doing a separate stream from the original schedule. So I want people to be able to find you, because I think what you're doing is great. And we're going to all celebrate Carpe Diem Day with Yvette next year on February 26th. So maybe we'll get back together too sometime around that.
That'd be fun. All right. Well, thank you so much, Patti.
And I just want to mention too that my course on grief is live now, and people can find that on my website. And I'll also post that in the section over here. And
I'm taking it, and it's great. I'm really enjoying it. I mean, it's got some, I wish I had taken it before, but it's good. It's actually good to take it now, experiencing grief and preparing myself for the next time I experience grief.
Yeah, good. Well, thank you. Yeah, it's not interactive. It's do it on your own, PowerPoints and videos, and
very well done. Impressive.
Yeah, thanks, Yvette. It was so fun to talk to you, and happy Thanksgiving to you. And
thank you.
We'll talk again soon.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.